When I bought my dream condo with my own money, my parents sued me in court, demanding I give it to my gambling-addicted brother. When I refused, he broke into my home and destroyed everything I owned. But when I showed the police the security footage, he begged for mercy from behind bars. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how I finally broke free from my toxic family. Growing up, I always knew I was different from my brother Lucas. Not in the way siblings are naturally different, but in the way our parents treated us. Lucas was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I was just there, an afterthought, a burden they never quite figured out what to do with. I remember when I was 6 years old, my entire class was buzzing about their family vacations. Kids talked about Disneyland, the Grand Canyon, beach trips to Florida. When I came home and asked if we could go to Disneyland someday, my mother barely looked up from her magazine and said we couldn't afford it. 2 weeks later, Lucas came home with a brand new skateboard, video games, and stories about the amazing time he'd had at Disneyland with our parents. Just the three of them. I had stayed with our grandmother, who spent the entire week telling me I should be more grateful for what I had. I was 6 years old, and I learned that day that some people in your family matter more than others. The pattern continued throughout my childhood. Lucas got a new bike every year. I got hand-me-downs from cousins. Lucas had birthday parties with his entire class invited, elaborate cakes, and piles of presents. On my birthdays, if they were remembered at all, I got a card and maybe a gift card to Target. Lucas had his own room filled with the latest gaming systems, sports equipment, and posters of his favorite athletes. My room was the smallest in the house, barely big enough for a twin bed and a desk, painted a dingy beige color because, as my father said, there was no point wasting money on paint for a room nobody would see. When Lucas struggled in math, our parents hired a private tutor and bought him every educational tool imaginable. When I needed help with chemistry, I was told to figure it out myself or ask my teacher for extra help. Lucas played 3 different sports, and our parents never missed a single game. I joined the debate team in high school, and my parents didn't show up to a single competition, even when I made it to the state finals. But the moment that broke something fundamental inside me happened when I was 16. I had worked incredibly hard throughout high school, maintaining a perfect GPA while working part-time at a local coffee shop to save money for college. When I was accepted to UC San Diego with a partial scholarship, I was thrilled. It meant I'd still need to cover about $15,000 per year for tuition, housing, and expenses, but I had been saving, and I thought my parents might help with at least part of it. I was wrong. When I told them about my acceptance, my father barely glanced up from the football game Lucas was playing in. My mother said that was nice, and then immediately turned her attention back to cheering for Lucas. I tried to bring it up later, asking if they could help with any of the costs. My father looked at me like I'd asked him to give me a kidney and said they couldn't afford to help me. They had Lucas to think about, and he'd need their support for his future too. The thing was, Lucas was only 14 at the time. He hadn't even started thinking about college. And I knew for a fact that my parents weren't struggling financially. They both had decent jobs, my father as a manager at a manufacturing plant, and my mother as an administrative assistant at a law firm. But apparently, investing in my future wasn't a priority. So I took out student loans. I worked 2 jobs during college, sometimes pulling all-nighters to finish assignments after closing shifts at a restaurant. I graduated at 22 with $30,000 in debt and a degree in marketing. My parents didn't come to my graduation. They said they couldn't miss Lucas's championship baseball game. It was a regional semifinal, not even the finals, just a semifinal. I stopped expecting anything from them after that. I moved to San Diego permanently, found a job at a growing tech startup, and threw myself into building a career. I was good at what I did. Really good. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior marketing specialist, and my salary jumped to $75,000 a year. I lived frugally, paid down my debt aggressively, and started saving for something I dreamed about since I was a teenager living in that tiny beige room. I wanted a home of my own, a place where I mattered, where I could paint the walls any color I wanted, where nobody could make me feel small. When I was 24, I met Ryan at a networking event. He was a software developer, funny and kind, with this incredible ability to make me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. We started dating, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be someone's priority. Ryan didn't just listen to me talk about my dreams, he actively helped me work toward them. He encouraged me to negotiate for higher pay, helped me create a budget to maximize my savings, and never once made me feel like my goals were too ambitious or silly. After a year of dating, we moved in together. We combined our incomes, our savings, our dreams. Ryan was making good money as a senior developer, and together, we started seriously house hunting. We knew we couldn't afford a traditional house in San Diego's insane real estate market, but we could afford a condo. A really nice condo. We spent 6 months looking at places, attending open houses every weekend, getting pre-approved for mortgages, calculating and recalculating what we could afford. And then we found it. A stunning 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo in a newer building in the Gaslamp Quarter. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the bay. Modern kitchen with granite countertops. In-unit washer and dryer. A parking space and a storage unit. It was $450,000, which was a lot of money, but it was perfect. Ryan and I split the down payment. We both signed the mortgage. We both would be on the deed. This was ours, built from our hard work, our sacrifices, our shared future. When we finally got the keys and walked into our condo for the first time as owners, I cried. Not sad tears, but tears of accomplishment, of pride, of finally having something that was mine. I didn't tell my parents right away. We hadn't spoken much over the past few years, just the occasional text message on holidays and perfunctory phone calls where my mother would talk about Lucas's latest achievements and I would make polite noises before finding an excuse to hang up. But about 3 weeks after we moved in, I posted a photo on social media of Ryan and me holding our keys in front of our building, captioned with a simple, "Officially homeowners." I wasn't trying to show off. I was just genuinely happy and wanted to share it with friends. That's when everything fell apart. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother, which was unusual. She never called unless she needed something. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. The conversation started normally enough. She congratulated me on the condo, said she was happy for me. Then she asked if she and my father could come visit and see the place. I was surprised, but figured it might be a nice gesture, a chance to maybe, finally, get some recognition from them. So I said yes. They arrived the following weekend, and I should have known something was wrong when they showed up with Lucas. He was 22 now, still living at home, working part-time at a sporting goods store while supposedly figuring out what he wanted to do with his life. But what really caught me off guard was how uncomfortable Lucas looked. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and he seemed jittery, like he'd had too much coffee. Ryan and I gave them a tour of the condo. My father made a few comments about how expensive it must be, how we were probably in over our heads with the mortgage payments. My mother kept looking around with this weird expression, like she was calculating something. Lucas just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. After the tour, we all sat down in the living room. I offered them drinks, trying to be hospitable despite the strange energy in the room. That's when my father cleared his throat and said they needed to talk to me about something important. He told me that Lucas was in trouble. Serious trouble. He owed $80,000 to some very dangerous people. My blood ran cold. $80,000. How was that even possible? My father explained that Lucas had gotten involved in sports betting about 2 years ago. What started as small bets on football games had escalated into a full-blown gambling addiction. He'd maxed out credit cards, taken out personal loans, borrowed money from friends who were now threatening to cut him off completely. And recently, he'd started betting with illegal bookies who were now demanding payment. These weren't people who would just let it go. They were threatening Lucas, calling our parents' house at all hours, showing up at the sporting goods store where he worked. I sat there, processing this information, feeling a mix of shock and something else I couldn't quite name. Vindication, maybe? The golden child had finally screwed up in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. But then my father said something that made my stomach drop. He said they needed my help. They needed me to sell the condo and give Lucas the money to pay off his debts. I actually laughed. I thought he was joking, but the look on his face told me he was deadly serious. I asked him if he'd lost his mind. This was my home, mine and Ryan's. We'd worked for years to save for it, and he wanted me to just give it up for Lucas? Lucas, who had been handed everything his entire life and had squandered it all on gambling. My father's expression hardened. He said family was supposed to help family, that Lucas made a mistake, but he was still my brother, and these people might actually hurt him. He said I was being selfish, that I didn't need a condo this big anyway. Ryan and I could get a smaller apartment, something more reasonable for just 2 people. Lucas needed this more than I did. My mother chimed in, her voice taking on that guilt-tripping tone I knew so well. She said they'd always done their best for both of us, that they'd given me a good home growing up, paid for my food and shelter until I went to college. This was my chance to give back to the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They'd given me a good home. They'd barely acknowledged my existence for most of my childhood, and now they wanted me to sacrifice everything I'd worked for to bail out Lucas from his own terrible decisions. I told them no, absolutely not. This condo was mine and Ryan's. We'd worked for it, saved for it, and we weren't selling it. If Lucas had gotten himself into this mess, he needed to figure out how to get himself out. Maybe get a full-time job. Maybe go to counseling for his gambling addiction. But I wasn't giving up my home for him. My father stood up, his face red with anger. He said I was making a huge mistake, that I was being selfish and ungrateful, that they'd find another way to handle this, but I'd regret not helping when I had the chance. They left shortly after that, Lucas still not having said a single word to me during the entire visit. Ryan, who had been sitting quietly beside me during this whole exchange, squeezed my hand after they were gone. He told me I'd done the right thing, that what they'd asked was completely unreasonable, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We both knew this wasn't over. We were right to be worried. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter in the mail. My parents were suing me. They were claiming that they had provided financial assistance toward the purchase of the condo and were therefore entitled to partial ownership. They were demanding that I either give them their share of the value, which they calculated as 50%, or transfer the deed to Lucas. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This couldn't be real. They were actually suing me? I immediately called a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in family law and property disputes. When I showed her the lawsuit, she asked if my parents had actually given me any money toward the condo. I thought hard. And then I remembered. About 5 years ago, when I'd graduated from college, my father had sent me a check for $5,000 with a card that said, "Congratulations." At the time, I'd been shocked because it was the most financial support they'd ever given me. I deposited it and used it to help pay down some of my student loans. I'd thought it was a graduation gift, but now, apparently, they were claiming it had been a loan, or an investment in my future home. Patricia asked if I had anything in writing that clarified it was a gift. I didn't. It had been 5 years ago, and who thinks to get gift documentation from their own parents? Patricia said we could fight this. We had a strong case. The deed was in my name and Ryan's. We had documentation showing we'd paid the entire down payment from our own savings accounts. We had the mortgage in our names, but we'd need to prove that the $5,000 had been a gift, not a loan or investment. That meant gathering evidence, emails, text messages, witness testimonies from anyone who might have been present or who I'd talked to about it at the time. I spent the next several weeks going through every email and text message from 5 years ago. I found the thank you text I'd sent my father after receiving the check, where I'd said, "Thank you so much for the generous graduation gift." He'd responded with, "You're welcome. Use it wisely." That was good. The word gift was right there. But Patricia said my father's lawyers would argue that his response was just being polite and didn't confirm the nature of the payment. I also found emails to friends where I'd mentioned being surprised by the graduation gift from my parents. I got statements from 2 friends who remembered me talking about it at the time and confirmed I'd referred to it as a gift. I pulled bank records showing that I'd deposited the $5,000 into my personal account, not into any kind of joint account or investment fund, and that I'd used it to pay student loans, not toward savings for a house. The lawsuit dragged on for 4 months. 4 months of depositions, document requests, legal fees piling up. Patricia was expensive, but she was good. She built an airtight case showing that not only was the $5,000 clearly a gift, but that my parents had a pattern of favoring Lucas financially throughout our lives. She subpoenaed my parents' financial records, showing they'd given Lucas tens of thousands of dollars over the years for cars, college tuition they'd ended up paying for when he dropped out after 1 semester, credit card debt they'd covered previously. She also had me document every instance of emotional and financial neglect I could remember. The missed birthday parties, the lack of support for college, the graduation they didn't attend. It was painful, dredging up all these memories, but Patricia said it established a pattern that would make the judge less sympathetic to their claims. Finally, we had our day in court. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia, Ryan beside me for support. Across the aisle sat my parents with their lawyer, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. Lucas wasn't there. Apparently, he didn't want to face me. The trial took 2 days. My parents' lawyer argued that the $5,000 had been intended as seed money for my future, that they'd expected me to use it toward a home purchase eventually, and that now that I'd bought a home, they were entitled to their fair share. Patricia systematically destroyed that argument. She presented the text messages, the emails, the witness testimonies. She showed the bank records proving I'd used the money for student loans, not savings. She presented my parents' financial records showing the massive disparity in how they'd treated Lucas versus me. And then she brought out her trump card. She had me testify about my childhood, about the pattern of favoritism and neglect. I talked about Disneyland, about working 2 jobs through college, about my graduation. I tried to keep my emotions in check, to be factual and clear, but at one point when I was talking about my 16th birthday, which they'd completely forgotten, I broke down crying on the stand. I saw my mother shift uncomfortably in her seat. My father stared straight ahead, expressionless. The judge listened to everything, reviewed all the documents, and finally rendered his verdict. He ruled in my favor on every single count. The $5,000 was clearly a gift. My parents had no claim to the condo. The lawsuit was dismissed. But that wasn't all. Patricia had filed a counterclaim for emotional distress and legal fees. The judge, clearly unimpressed with my parents' case and the evidence of their favoritism, awarded me $95,000 in damages. He said their lawsuit had been frivolous and appeared to be motivated by a desire to continue patterns of financial favoritism toward my brother at my expense. My parents were ordered to pay $95,000. I knew they didn't have that kind of money sitting around. They'd probably have to take out a loan or even sell their house to pay it. I should have felt triumphant. And I did, in a way. Justice had been served. But I also felt sad. This was my family. And now we were completely broken. After the trial, I decided I was done. I texted both of my parents and told them I didn't want any further contact. I blocked their numbers. I unfriended them on social media. I was cutting them out of my life completely. And it felt both terrifying and liberating. Ryan and I tried to move on. We focused on making our condo truly feel like home. We painted the spare bedroom a cheerful yellow and started talking about maybe having kids someday. We went on a vacation to Hawaii, something I'd never done as a child. Life was good. But then, about 6 weeks after the trial, everything exploded in a way I never saw coming. It was a Thursday afternoon. I had the day off and was working on some freelance marketing projects from home. Ryan was at his office downtown. Around 2 in the afternoon, I decided to run to the grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner. I was gone for maybe 45 minutes. When I came back, carrying 2 bags of groceries, I noticed our door was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I'd definitely locked it when I left. I pushed the door open slowly, and what I saw made me drop the groceries. Our condo had been destroyed. The living room was a disaster. Our TV was smashed, the screen shattered into a spider web of cracks. The couch cushions had been slashed, stuffing spilling out. Picture frames were smashed on the floor, glass everywhere. In the kitchen, cabinet doors hung open and dishes were shattered across the floor. Red paint had been splattered across the white walls, dripping down in angry streaks like blood. And standing in the middle of it all was Lucas. He was holding a baseball bat, breathing hard, his eyes wild. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe. Or fear. But then his expression hardened into something ugly. He started yelling at me, screaming about how this was all my fault, that I'd ruined everything. That because of me and my lawsuit, our parents were going to lose their house. They had to take out a second mortgage to pay the judgment, and they might not be able to make the payments. His life was falling apart, and it was all because I was selfish and refused to help him. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, as my brother raged at me, this person I'd grown up with now, a complete stranger filled with hate. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Emma, get out of there. Now." It was Ryan. He must have come home early, maybe forgot something. He was standing in the doorway, his phone already out and dialed. Lucas saw Ryan and seemed to deflate slightly. The bat lowered a bit. Ryan spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "Lucas, I've already called 911. The police are on their way. I watched you break in on the security camera. All of this is recorded. You need to put down the bat and leave before you make this worse." That's when I remembered. We'd installed security cameras a month ago, one facing the front door and one in the living room, mainly because the building had had a few package thefts. They were connected to an app on our phones. Ryan had been watching the whole thing unfold. Lucas looked around wildly, like he was trying to figure out his options. Then he spotted the camera in the corner of the living room. His face went pale. He dropped the bat and ran for the door. Ryan stepped aside to let him pass, and Lucas disappeared down the hallway. Ryan immediately pulled me into his arms, checking if I was okay. Within minutes, police arrived. Ryan showed them the security footage on his phone. It was all there. Lucas using a crowbar to force open our door. Lucas smashing our TV with the bat. Lucas spray painting the walls. Lucas destroying our furniture, our belongings, everything we'd worked for. The footage even had clear audio of Lucas's rant when I'd walked in, him explicitly admitting he'd done it as revenge for the lawsuit. The police asked us to assess the damage and give them an estimate. We walked through the condo with a detective, cataloging everything. The TV, $2,000. The couch, $1,500. The dishes and kitchen equipment, $1,000. The laptop Lucas had smashed, $1,200. The damaged walls that would need to be repainted and repaired, at least $3,000. When we added it all up, the total was over $25,000 in damages. The detective told us they'd put out a warrant for Lucas's arrest. With the video evidence, it was an open and shut case of breaking and entering, vandalism, and destruction of property. They found Lucas 6 hours later at our parents' house. He'd gone straight there, probably hoping they'd protect him. They couldn't. The evidence was too clear. Lucas was arrested and charged. His bail was set at $50,000, which my parents couldn't afford after having to pay the previous judgment. So Lucas sat in jail while he waited for trial. I spent the next few weeks cleaning up the destruction, working with insurance to get reimbursed for the damages, repainting the walls. Ryan took time off work to help. We turned it into a project, choosing new colors we liked even better than the original beige. We bought a better TV. We upgraded our couch. In a weird way, Lucas's destruction gave us the opportunity to really make the place ours. The legal case moved quickly. Lucas's public defender tried to argue that he'd been under extreme emotional distress, that he'd made a mistake. But the video footage was damning. He'd brought a crowbar and a bat. He'd planned this. It wasn't a moment of passion. It was premeditated. Lucas was offered a plea deal. 18 months in jail and 5 years probation. He'd also be required to pay full restitution for the damages, $25,000. His other option was to go to trial, where he'd likely face even harsher sentencing. He took the plea deal. I attended his sentencing hearing. I don't really know why. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed to see him face consequences for once in his life. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I almost said no. But then I stood up and walked to the microphone. I looked at Lucas, sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, and I told him and everyone in that courtroom what it had been like growing up in his shadow, what it felt like to watch him get everything while I got nothing, how I'd worked myself to exhaustion to build a life I could be proud of, only to have my own family try to tear it down. I told him I didn't hate him. That made him look up, surprise on his face. I said I actually felt sorry for him, because he'd been raised to believe he was entitled to everything without having to work for it. And now he was going to prison because he'd never learned that actions have consequences. I said I hoped he'd use his time in jail to reflect and to get help for his gambling addiction. And then I said I forgave him. Not for his sake, but for mine. Because I was done carrying anger and resentment. I was done letting my family's dysfunction dictate my life. The judge thanked me and then sentenced Lucas to the agreed-upon 18 months with credit for time served. My parents tried to approach me after the hearing, but I turned and walked away. I had nothing left to say to them. That was 3 years ago. Lucas is out of prison now. I heard through a mutual cousin that he's living in a halfway house and working at a warehouse, paying back his restitution in small monthly installments. I hope he's doing better. I genuinely do. My parents sold their house to pay the $95,000 judgment and the legal fees from Lucas's case. They're renting a small apartment now. I heard my father had to take early retirement. I don't feel guilty about it anymore. They made their choices and I made mine. As for me and Ryan, we're thriving. We got married 2 years ago in a small ceremony with friends and Ryan's family. No one from my biological family was invited. Last year, we had a baby girl. We named her Sophie, and she's perfect. She'll grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she matters, knowing she's a priority. I look at her sometimes, sleeping in her yellow nursery, and I think about the scared little girl I used to be, desperate for her parents' approval. That girl doesn't exist anymore. I've become the person I always needed, and I'm giving Sophie the childhood I never had. Our condo is filled with photos of our little family, artwork Sophie makes at daycare, evidence of a life built on love and mutual respect. The walls aren't beige anymore. They're painted in colors we chose together, colors that make us happy. And every time I walk through that door, I remember that this is mine. I earned it. I fought for it. And no one can ever take it away from me.